Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. It is class 11th subject economics, and today we are going to discuss the another chapter of your syllabus, that is liberalization, privatization, and globalization. Dear students, as far as these concepts are concerned, since in 1991, Government of India has introduced various economic reforms to pull the economy out of the economic crisis and to accelerate the economic growth. So, economic reforms या कोई रिफॉर्म्स जब लिए जाते हैं बाय गवर्नमेंट, तो रिफॉर्म्स किस लिए लिए जाते हैं? Reforms are usually undertaken to uplift any sector and to reduce and or we can say that curb the difficulties in the way of development, in the way of success. When any sector, whether it is private sector or government sector, feels that the situation in which they are prevailing does not suit to the conditions, so reforms are undertaken. Similarly, in our country in 1991, it was felt that our economy is facing crisis. So in order to pull out the country from these economic crises, economic reforms were undertaken in 1991, and these reforms were undertaken and introduced when Manmohan Singh was the finance minister of our country. Dear students, as far as its first term, that is liberalization, is concerned, what do we mean by liberalization? In economics, liberalization means reduction or relaxation in government regulations in a country to allow the private sector companies to operate business and activities with few restrictions, and or we can say that to give them freeness in the economic activity, so as to encourage economic development in the country. Yes, dear students, liberalization policies include partial or full privatization of government institutions and assets, low tax rates for businesses, less restrictions on both domestic and foreign capital. The Indian economy was liberalized in year 1991. In India, the concept of economic liberalization was introduced to attain several objectives like expansion and development of industrial sector, expansion in private and foreign investment. These were some basic objectives of liberalization of our economy. Dear students, during the period of planning, public sector was given the most importance. However, private sector was largely kept under government control. Thus, trade and industry were subject to many restrictions. The effect of these restrictions was felt in 1991, when our country was faced with an unprecedented economic crisis. Reserves of foreign exchange were just sufficient to pay for 2 weeks' imports, and the faith of our country at international level was shaken. Industrial progress was on a reverse gear and prices were skyrocketing. So, in order to reduce or in order to curb these bottlenecks in the development of economic reforms like liberalization was undertaken in 1991 in our country. However, as you see here, that what were the causes of this economic crisis? It was mainly due to the restrictions which the government was imposing in businesses and trade. So, in order to overcome the concept like liberalization was introduced in 1991 in our country. However, so in order to overcome or in order to pull the economy out of the economic crisis and to put it on the path of rapid and steady economic development, it was felt that most essential to correct financial disequilibrium, curb rising prices, correct adverse balance of payment, and replenish foreign exchange reserves. To achieve all these objects, introduction of economic reforms or an appropriate economic policy was considered. So, need for economic reforms or new economic policy was felt mainly because of the reasons like increase in fiscal deficit. That is what is fiscal deficit. जिस तरह एक इंडिविजुअल एस्टिमेट करता है, एग्जामाइन करता है whether he is going to lead prosperous life or whether he is going to develop day by day or whether he is going to or poor day by day. So he makes estimation of that, whether how much he have spent and how much he have earned. Similarly, country makes estimation like this. If the total expenditure by the government exceeds its revenue, that's earnings, so we can say that there is fiscal deficit. So fiscal deficit means when government's expenditure exceeds its earnings. So we can say that the government is in fiscal deficit. So the main purpose of liberalization was felt when it was felt that in 1991 that the fiscal deficit of the government had been mounting year after year on account of continuous increase in its non-development expenditure. So it was felt that there is need of liberalization so as to increase the government revenues. And another main and broad, we can say the broad effect which leads to this liberalization is mounting adverse balance of payments. What is balance of payment? Yes, dear students. Balance of payment is the difference between total exports and total imports of a country. When total imports exceeds to total export, the balance of payment becomes adverse. Our country needs foreign exchange to pay for the imports of goods and services. The required foreign exchange is earned by exporting goods and services. When the receipts of foreign exchange fall short of their payments, or when the value of total imports is greater than the value of total exports, the problem of adverse effect balance of payment arises. So there was need to make liberalization, or to uplift, or to remove the restrictions which government were levying on the foreign trade. So in order to overcome this difficulty, liberalization was undertaken. So dear student, this was the brief introduction of liberalization. In next lecture we will discuss it in briefly. So it was all about today. Allah Hafiz.